on vinyl community? Welcome to another video with the Record Spinner. In today's video, I'm going to be showcasing 5 amazing sounding pressings in my vinyl collection. So it's very much a general consensus that vinyl and the sound of analog recordings come across as sounding particularly great. However, with that said, there are some notable pressings and reissue labels that serve justice to the wonders of analog recordings, predominantly audiophile targeted labels such as MoFi and Analog Productions. So I decided to comb through my collection and showcase some records that stand out as being some of the best sounding pressings in my collection. Now, some of these are audiophile targeted releases, and some are relatively mainstream to the general public. Now, this is not ranked in any order by any means, so enough of the chit-chat. Let's jump into what this video is all about. So the first album I'm going to show you guys is the self-titled debut from Boston. Now, this pressing was done by the Friday Music label and is mastered by Kevin Gray. Now, I should mention that a factor to how a pressing can sound is down to how well the recording was recorded and engineered. Now, in this case, what would come across as rather amateurish, having this album recorded at Boston's founder Tom Scholz's home recording studio, it actually comes across as one of the finest examples of home recording. Tom used multi-layered guitars and instrumentation to broaden the soundstage and give the music a bit of multi-textured sound and depth to it. Each instrument is brilliantly recorded, and if you haven't known that this was recorded in a basement by any means, you would think that this was done in a glitzy recording studio. And it could be seen as somewhat of an encouragement gesture for indie bands to use unconventional recording locations, because you never know, maybe you might be recording one of the next best-sounding albums ever, just like this album here. So the next record I'm going to show you guys is a major shift in terms of genre compared to what I just showed you first. Next up is Lark's Tongues and Aspic by King Crimson. Now, this is the 200-gram reissue, which came out back in 2013 on the DGM label, and this is mastered by John Dent. This album is a national treasure in terms of great sound quality. Everything from the way that this recording sounds in general to the mastering, it just hits spades completely. It's a very dynamic recording, and the shifts in the musical arrangements contribute to that reason. The first part of the title track starts with the African thumb piano and the percussion flourishes, and it's very kind of soothing sounding, and your ears get adapted to that within like the first 2 minutes. And then after that, you hear the wind chimes kind of kick in, or at least I think it's wind chimes, I'm not quite sure. The violin starts the main portion of the song, and Robert Fripp's distorted guitar creeps in and out, and just from the recording alone, it's very suspenseful sounding, but you can almost sense the tension when you hear it in person. And then the crescendo builds up, the band fully kicks in, and the sound just explodes. It's a very in-your-face, punchy listening experience, and it's sure enough to make your jaw drop. So if you have not heard this pressing, or let alone heard this album, you need to check it out. You will not be disappointed. And now, we gotta talk about MoFi. So out of all the MoFi records that I have in my collection, I went ahead and chose Weezer's Green album. The drums kick in first on the opening track, Don't Let Go, and it sounds as if the drums are in the room you are listening in, and the band kicks in with this wall of sound that just fills up the soundstage. Every bit of instrumentation is very forward and direct sounding. It stands strong, in my opinion, as a testament to what MoFi's mission is within the vinyl and audiophile world, and that is just delivering state-of-the-art sound with superb pressing quality and half-speed mastering, which brings forth more dimension to the sound of the recording. And speaking of half-speed mastering, my next pick is going to be the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper Lonely Hearts Club Band. Now, the pressing that I chose is the 2017 stereo remix that was mastered at half speed by Miles Showell. This album truly comes to life in this configuration, partly due to it being so musically dense, and I mean that in the most positive way possible. You have influences ranging from vaudeville, Indian, circus, and music hall, meshed with this hint of psychedelia and rock trademark that the Beatles had already established. Now, what fueled this inspiration was the band's willingness to experiment in the studio, and that meant lots of overdubs and layers played into the making of this album. Now, the original stereo mix consisted of fold-downs from bouncing multi-tracks, and sure, this album does work really well in mono, and for many years John Lennon has gone on record saying that in order to hear Pepper in the best format, it's mono. But I think in order to witness this album in its purest form and its true nature, the half-speed stereo remixed edition is an absolute must. Giles Martin, who is the son of producer George Martin, remixed this and basically took all of the original takes from the original tapes and spread them across in the stereo spectrum, utilizing much more modern mixing techniques when compared to the original. Alright, so those 4 albums were relatively easy to pick, and I kind of struggled to find a strong contender for the 5th. Now, after digging deep into my collection, I picked a release that stood out immediately when I first played it a couple years ago when I had first received it. Now, granted, my setup was not what it is now when I got this album in the first place, and to think that this album sounded amazing on the setup that I had before, I can only imagine what it sounds like now, and I haven't spun this album in a really long time, and I think I ought to experience it for myself. So, my last album I'm going to show in this video is The Ramones' Road to Ruin. Now, this is the Rhino reissue that was done back in 2011, mastered from the original tapes by Chris Bellman. Now, I saw this album in the same light as the Boston album, which is how this album was recorded. Now, the Ramones had already established this sort of Phil Spector-esque wall of sound with the basic bar chords and the bass simply playing the root of the chord. Producer Ed Stasium really brings that wall of sound to life with what I think is the most brilliantly recorded Ramones album, and part of what makes this album brilliantly recorded is the engineering. The engineer for this album was a guy by the name of Ray Janos, who as of right now is currently one of the head vinyl mastering engineers at Sterling Sound. Now, I have many pressings that were cut by Ray that sound spectacular, and from a recording standpoint, he does the Ramones serious justice, so that's why I went ahead and picked this as one of the best sounding pressings in my collection. So there you guys go. Those are my 5 picks for amazing sounding pressings in my vinyl collection. Now here is a question for you. Which albums stand out as being some of the best sounding in your collection? Please drop a comment down below, I'd love to know. And if you enjoyed this video, please go ahead, give it a like, and subscribe to the channel. See you guys in the next video, and most importantly, keep the record spinning.